Hey, you miserable accursed. It's the curse of politics. I'm your host, David Herle, and joined by my stalwart campaigners, Kory Teneycke, Scott Reid, and back from family vacation in the wilds of the boreal forest, Jordan Leichnitz. We have another stellar lineup for you today. Is Pablo Rodriguez going to leave the federal cabinet and lead the provincial Liberals in Quebec? What does it mean for a Liberal Party stalling out in midair? Our clipping is a routine reporting of campaign events one day in Hamilton. All three parties were active, and I found the messaging as reported to be really interesting. We'll look at what the parties are saying and why. That clipping comes to us from Justin Chandler at CBC News. Lastly, with Jordan back from a couple of weeks of reflection, we're going to talk about what the NDP's moves are between now and the election. And then, of course, the great Gordon Pinsent will call us to order for the Hey Yous. Hey, Jordan. Good to have you back.
It's good to see you all.
Tell us a little bit about your vacation.
Well, we did, notwithstanding the carbon tax, we did a road trip.
Holland is very unhappy with you now.
Yeah, I'm sure. We were down in the US, where I must admit, as a Canadian, it's still the most thrilling thing to go into a grocery store, and butter is like, I don't know, it's like $2. So it's like the non-supply managed dairy was very exciting for us. But yeah, we drove around Vermont and did some hiking and stuff like that. And then we were back up here doing a little bit of canoe camping and fishing and stuff, not too far from Ottawa. So that was a good time. We escaped the major rain. Everybody is like back at camps today. So yeah, it was a nice time away.
The last time I was in Vermont, I spent the entire day holed up in my cabin watching O.J. Simpson drive down the fucking highway in a white Bronco, chased by choppers and cops.
That's wild.
It was a lot. I've not in 1994 or whatever. I've not been back to Vermont since, but I'm telling you that was as compelling as Vermont is. That was a day.
That's staggering, because if you had asked me, I would have sworn that you and I watched the O.J. Simpson chase together live in the bar at Mama Teresa's, because there was a joint birthday party for you and Nick Maschantonio, I thought.
Really? No, I watched it with Mario Cucinato in Vermont.
That's strange. Memory's a fading and failing thing.
Yeah. Right. It was just you and Nick.
It was me and Nick. we were eating that bocconcini salad and having a hell of a time.
Anyway,
time is a flat circle.
Anyway, back to you. Did you have a good time? Were the kids fully vacationed and all that?
Yeah, they were fully vacationed. It was good. I think 2 weeks was perfect. Like by the end of 2 weeks, we're all a little ready for some time apart. But no, it was good. They had a good time. I think my 6-year-old's ready for a bigger fishing rod. So like all the good milestones accomplished. Drank a lot of beer. Did a lot of not listening or watching politics. So ready, of course, to be right back at it.
Kory, I'm looking at your background there. Can I come over and play a game of Clue with you?
Yes.
He's got Shogun there too.
We got Shogun.
Classics.
I'm in Vancouver Island in a friend's cottage, and everyone else is still asleep because it's early here. Well, not that early, but early for vacation. And so it's got all the normal decorations you find in a basement of a cottage, including a lot of old board games and puzzles and stuff like that.
Fuck, I hate puzzles. Yeah, I really hate puzzles. I've never completed a crossword puzzle. Not a crossword, I mean a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah.
So good.
You want me to insert
what?
Opinion.
You want us to comment on what grand deficiency that reveals in your character, but
yeah,
we're just going to leave that.
All right, fuck it.
Speaks for itself.
We should get a curse of politics puzzle, and people can ponder our faces as they put everything together and wonder whose gray hair is whose.
And we'll have Jordan in the corner starting a fire with nothing but sticks and damp leaves.
Is Reid's hair
preparing for the future, Scott?
Is Reid's hairpiece one piece of the jigsaw puzzle, or are there a number of pieces that go into that?
Hopefully just one.
Get the fake hair a lot.
All right, so provincial Liberals in Quebec are having a leadership race. So far, one candidate, Denis Coderre. He supported me for national president of the Young Liberals in 1985, so he's got that going for him in this race. The provincial Liberals are in a really weird position. They are so strong among the English and Allophone voters that they're quite likely to be the official opposition after the next election, but they get so few votes from Francophones that they can't possibly win an election. However, the separatist PQ are on the march, and that's an opponent the Liberals know. Last week, Radio Canada reported that Pablo Rodriguez, Trudeau's transport minister and Quebec lieutenant, is interested in the provincial Liberal job. A few days later, the Hill Times said it was a done deal, that he's definitely going. So, Kory, is this just another player leaving the field before the carnage begins here? Is this...
Kind of looks that way.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good thing for Quebec politics, though. Quebec Liberals have really, I think, suffered from a lack of star power on their ticket. And I haven't seen recent data in terms of who's more popular in terms of potential leadership candidates. But Rodriguez has been around politics a long time, and I got to think his name recognition's got to be up there for Quebec politicians. He also, I'd be remiss not to point out, has the best hair in Parliament, which I got to say
always
means something.
has. Yeah.
But yeah, he's got some game. He's Quebec lieutenant for a reason, I assume, and that's to lose somebody at that senior a level is not great. And this isn't the first person. Seamus, we've talked about before on the show, leaving is, I think, consequential to them generally in across the government, but particularly in Newfoundland. And then losing Rodriguez, like this is not good stuff for them.
Yeah, just to your point on Pablo, by the way, I keep referring to this poll because I haven't seen a follow-up to it, but like 2 years ago, Leger did a poll of everybody who's involved in politics in Quebec. And Pablo was one of the most widely recognized and one of the most popular figures tested. And certainly head and shoulders above any other federal Liberal other than Trudeau and Joly in Quebec. And he's, like all people that come from Quebec, he's quite a nationalist, actually. Like he's more Federalist than Legault, but he's more nationalist than you would think. So I think he'll have a better time fitting in there. What do you see there, Jordan?
So yeah, and I was just going to say, I think for sure his prominence within Quebec would be missed on the federal Liberal benches. It's tough to see that, other than Joly, anybody else who could sort of take the exact space up that he occupies. I think it's also interesting, he's been pretty effective for the federal Liberals against the Bloc. And that is something that they will sorely miss if he does make this move, because it's a pretty special sauce to be able to effectively combat them kind of on their own terms. And I think he does that and has historically done that really, really well. And the other thing I think maybe speaks to a role that he had previously. So he was responsible for a ton of candidate recruitment in Quebec. Leading up to 2015. And so he's very well connected, and he was really an important pipeline for the party at an organizational level. And so I think his departure, for me, it's like a little bit unique. You're not just sort of struggling with the optics of losing somebody who's well known and well liked, but you're also losing somebody who's a pretty important piece of the machinery in the province in the immediate lead up to a campaign. So I can't help but think that there's a bit of a double blow there if he were to make the move.
Yeah. Scott, this comes at the same time as Abacus has a poll out yesterday, and I don't want to read too much into it because it's one data point, and it's different from what other polls have shown, but it showed the Conservatives narrowly edging past the Bloc for first place in Quebec, and the Liberals in third place in Quebec. These two events are probably not completely unrelated.
And it also shows that one of the issues that's carrying the Conservatives in a positive direction in Quebec is the issue of immigration. And I'm like you, I'm very, very hesitant to over-declare on the basis of one poll. But the reason it makes me curious, and I'm hyper curious to see if it's validated and extended by other findings, is that it confirms my suspicion and fear that this issue is breaking. And if it was going to break, you'd expect it to break particularly in the province of Quebec. And it
outside Montreal particularly, right?
Yeah. And so it could represent, what I think every single one of us at one point or another has predicted in the past year and a half, which is that the elite consensus that has kept immigration from becoming a partisan issue and has really sort of created an orthodoxy for 30, 40 years, that perhaps it's crumbling. Look, if the conservatives, for sure, if they can see that a route to winning seats in Quebec is the immigration issue, they're going to use it. And we've seen him use it. And if it's validated as a strategy, hold on to your hat. And I do think we know that if confronted with a competing orthodoxy on the issue, Canadians' views might be a jump ball at this point, given the pressures that we see on housing, social integration, and municipal services and so forth. So I worry about that. In terms of Pablo, I'll reiterate, it seems to me, I don't have a ton to say. First of all, I really like him. We've all worked with him. You and I have worked with him for a long, long time.
Yeah, he was one of our peeps back in the day. Yeah.
I loved him. I love the guy. And the hair, it's not just the hair, by the way. I mean, it's all hair, right? It's a hair-beard combination. Like, it's a Sam Elliott double fist. Fuck, man, check that out. Turn your head.
Does he ever pull it off? He pulls it off.
Oh, man, it is a mane. It is a very lion-esque presentation. But Jordan's
Speaking of which, manes makes me think of the fact that Coder put out a tweet this morning with a French quotation, which he said is the quote of the day, which said, "It's not how good a person in front of you looks, it's how loyal they are behind you."
Okay. Fuck, dynamite. I'm coming back to that, okay? Because this is where. So I just want to hit on Jordan's point, which is just to echo what she said, and then I'm going to what you just said, because it's really my sort of meta view on this whole thing. So first, to Jordan's point, you're not just losing another minister. You're not just losing another member who's well known, right? You're losing your Quebec lieutenant, and that's a big deal. Because we are presumably within a year-ish of an election campaign. Quebec is supposed to be something of a firewall, at least the island of Montreal is supposed to be. And it's got to be anxiety-inducing. I also wonder, I don't pretend to know the internal dynamics, but it feels to me like the Trudeau operation, I don't know what it means to be the Quebec lieutenant anymore. I mean, I don't know. Is he in sole control of patronage? How does it work in terms of organization?
Well, they didn't want the job in the first place, right? They didn't create it in 2015. That's right. It was forced on them by the Quebec caucus in about 2017 as a position, right?
So I don't know exactly how they utilize it. I do know that Joly has been the anointed and the appointed lead Quebec minister for some time under these guys. That's just the way they've put the hands on her. I'm not suggesting that means he's disaffected or something, but it's not clear to me. My point really is this, just to be explicit. It's not clear to me what Quebec lieutenant is anymore under Trudeau. I knew what it was for decades under various leaders. To me, though, the fascinating thing is the intramurals of this, the many intramurals, right? So what does it mean in terms of federal caucus? Does this suggest that you're going to see a handful of other Quebec MPs step down? Other MPs, I think, we've all talked about, well, what's going to happen in terms of caucus? Will you see some kind of, grand uprising and revolt? Well, we've gone through a sleepy summer of the Liberals playing exactly zero cards, doing nothing, walking away from Toronto, St. Paul's, stumbling toward the two other by-elections, and so nothing's going on. So the point really that we've all made is don't expect an uprising, but do expect resignations. And so this is a big one. You have to assume that there's going to be more. But then I just want to go to the juicy intramurals, the deep, decades-long, fucked up psychology of Coder versus any other federal Liberal, right? That whole Coder is a deeply, deeply, deeply unique cat. And unique is carrying a lot of lumber in that sentence. So the fact that he's going out there saying, hey, don't just pick him because he's good looking and I'm not. By the way, I think I am good looking, mon cher. But like, it's just like there's the psychology and the histories and how they intertwine and interweave. And Coderre's obvious need to run. Like, and we've all seen this in politics, right? But he must. And since the age of 19, since we've known him, he's always needed to run, has to wield.
He has no fear of rejection. He must have been a machine in a bar back in the day.
Zero. And I'm just, I assume that Pablo has the upper hand. It'll be a fascinating race to watch. And like you, I think that Pablo hopefully, presumably, would fortify the Quebec Liberals' position. But, the province, the provincial politics right now, they fascinate me because do you get this situation where the CAQ and a rising Péquiste, a resurgent Péquiste, do they start to cancel each other out and spend a lot of time competing for the same votes? And that leaves Pablo a bit of a through lane. Could he capture people's imaginations? I'm not making wild predictions, but there are worse bets to make if you're the Quebec Liberals, that's for sure. I think Pablo is a good choice for them. But it's definitely a blow for Trudeau. And they'll pretend it isn't, but they pretend everything isn't. They pretend St. Paul's didn't happen. They pretend everything's just, it's fine. It's great. It's no problem. Somebody put a brick on the accelerator, headed towards a brick wall. But anyway.
Hey, Kory, let me come back to something Scott said about the immigration file, which is, the polls now say that most Canadians think we're letting too many people into the country, and the government's trying to ratchet that back. But it seems to me that the moment that happened was when it got linked with housing. I don't get the sense that it's as racially motivated as it might be in England right now, for example. I think it's more practical about the implications for the economy of admitting this many people. But nonetheless, talk to me a little bit about this. I'd always thought that the Paulos Conservatives didn't really want to play with this and didn't really want to exacerbate this. A, because I don't think they are anti-immigration, and second of all, because I think they have hopes for picking up a lot of new Canadian votes in a lot of places in the country. So it's a tricky issue for them, isn't it?
It is a tricky issue, but it plays differently than I think people realize, or it plays in a way that is not as intuitive as some other issues. Concern around immigration is going up, and I think the reference to perhaps being a factor in Quebec, I think that's long been true. Legault certainly played footsie with that sentiment in a very explicit way, and to great effect, and which is interesting because there's less immigration in Quebec than there is in the rest of the country. They control more of the immigration process there. And last I checked, they were only using about 25% of their actual allotment for immigrants and putting more and more guardrails around it in terms of linguistic requirements and other things. So, it's been an issue for the electorate in Quebec for a long time. It's probably, after cost of living, the most rapidly rising issue in the issue set that's out there in terms of net change in sentiment. But it's about half the public now that is concerned about
60% too many is the number I last saw.
So, that is a change. I think the housing is part of it. I think the foreign student stuff, especially in the GTA, is just so unbelievably obvious and large a thing that's going on, and a problematic thing that's going on. That's probably another part of what's driving it. But the part that's not so intuitive about this is new Canadians are the most intense around their feelings that there's too many people coming in, which is the interesting thing. Like, we just went through a provincial by-election in Milton with a pretty high percentage of new Canadians in that riding. But if you were to go to areas like Brampton as a whole, where you're seeing a lot of the foreign students residing, the concern is coming from within the community of new Canadians more than it is the general population. So I think it's more complicated than you'd think. That said, it shouldn't be surprising. Like, we spent most of my life with the high end of immigration being about 250,000 people a year. If you're including temporary foreign workers and temporary student visas, we're over 1 million. It's a crazy large number compared to what it historically has been, and it's creating all kinds of pressures on the education system, the healthcare system, roads and highways, housing, like right across the board. But it's not affecting them in an equal way. You tend to see a greater impact in the places where you already have a lot of new Canadians, and so I think that's maybe partially what's creating that differential in sentiment between new Canadians and others. Like, the number of stories that you've seen of students being stacked up like cordwood in somebody's garage in Brampton at $1,000 a month per head is, it's alarming. It's not a great situation for anyone involved, including the students who've been brought over here largely under false circumstances.
There's certainly lots of room for the Conservatives to criticize the government's policy, the Liberals' policy, without coming off as anti-immigration, because you can simply argue, let's go back to 250 or 300,000 people a year, rather than the 1.5 million people that we've been letting in between the various sources. Labs and incubators. There was a time when these words were pretty much the sole province of the medical and scientific communities. Fast forward a couple of generations, and they now apply more broadly in business and creative spaces. We don't just come up with ideas anymore. We incubate them, right? We do collabs in idea labs. That's a segue that lands me at the front door of our presenting sponsor TELUS's 5G lab in Quebec. Part of the summer of fascinating and very useful tech we've been talking about here. The TELUS 5G lab was developed in partnership with Guy Laliberté's Zoo incubator. Its purpose? Helping young Quebec businesses innovate and rapidly develop their technological proofs of concept to grow faster. What equipment will you find there? Well, it's a far cry from beakers and Bunsen burners. This is a state-of-the-art space for creation, testing, and experimentation with the latest 5G connectivity. Various editing and immersive content production rooms, and more of the digital tools these startups need to develop their ideas. Just one success story. A Quebec company called Phenomena hosted the world's first ever virtual reality e-sport arena tournament in 2022. It was a huge thing. Even huger, support from TELUS and Zoo helped Phenomena expand to 22 countries and over 70 locations, making the company and Montreal global leaders in free roam virtual reality. And that's sort of the point, eh? The 5G lab contributes to the city's rep as a hub of creativity and innovation and supports its economic vitality. It's a key piece of TELUS's broader $10 billion investment to expand and enhance network infrastructure and operations in Quebec, which has the very real effect of driving technology and growth in critical sectors like mining, public safety, telecommunications, defense, and transportation. More next week. Hey, Jordan, back to politics for a second. If the Liberals are third in Quebec and down at 25 points, what's the remaining electoral argument for Trudeau?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And I think, the results of the Montreal by-election that's coming up as well will likely factor into how the Liberal or the Quebec Liberal caucus feels about that question, because there is a real risk that if Rodriguez leaves, if the by-election doesn't go well for them, then you end up with really the last bastion, the last place where federal Liberal support has more or less held, eroding in some pretty significant and demonstrable ways. So yeah, I mean, I think that his case can probably no longer just be rooted in, well, I'm going to deliver Quebec to you. It's not that simple anymore, and the by-election may prove to make that even more complicated. So I don't have a good answer for that, and I'm not sure he does either.
No, he doesn't. It's the. I mean, Scott, surely nobody's arguing that somebody that would replace Trudeau would do worse in Ontario. I mean, we're on track to win about 17 fucking seats in Ontario. So who's going to do worse in Ontario? The fear was always that the bottom would fall out of Quebec if you replace Trudeau with somebody else. So if we're down to our English Montreal ridings anyway, probably anybody can hold those.
Yeah, but the assumption in your question is that somebody feels a need to place an argument. I mean, that was the argument I made a year and a half ago as to why I was anxious about the suggestion that Trudeau should leave. Like, I'm thinking to myself, who's better than this guy? Who has an affinity with Quebec and has demonstrated the ability to win seats in Quebec and still has some polling support in Quebec, all those kinds of things. But we've seen all of that slowly erode. I don't imagine we're going to see it unerode over the course of the next number of months. But that's not the dynamic that's now happening. It's not like people are saying, well, the only reason I'm continuing in caucus to support the prime minister is because I think he's got to play in Quebec. I mean, they've moved to a different place. We're not going to contest his leadership. No one's going to push him out. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying people should. And he's not making the argument or the pitch to people, hey, don't worry, hang on to me because I can still win seats in Quebec. It's, you know what, eventually people will tune in. They will notice what a prick Poilievre is. They'll be uncomfortable with the fundamental clash of values. The economy will be on a rebound, not on a death spiral, and it'll be a brand new ball game. So they're not litigating the argument in the way that we are discussing it right there.
Right. No, the Liberal strategy at the moment is people will come to their senses.
That's what they be the case.
That's what they believe. All right. So let's move on. Right?
Like Pablo.
As polling shows ridings up for grabs in the Hamilton region, politicians from the three federal parties visited the city within the last 8 days to promote policies and gain support from locals. Here's what the CBC report said about that day in Hamilton. On Friday morning, Conservative Party of Canada leader Pierre Poilievre was at steelmaker Stelco to promote an economic plan including tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles and parts. At the same time, over at downtown event space Mills Hardware, local Liberal members of Parliament Philomena Tassi, Chad Collins, and Lisa Hefner highlighted federal investment into festivals and events such as Hamilton's Supercrawl and Theatre Aquarius. And last week, federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was in Hamilton to meet local politicians and make the case to end federal funding for bad corporate landlords. Scott, I find the juxtaposition of these issues really interesting. What do you make of the varying messages?
Well, it's alarming unless you're a conservative. And I watched this news conference, by the way, and I think there's a lot to come back to in terms of Poilievre's news conference. The way in which he comported himself, the tone and assertion and the acid in his voice, I think there's vulnerabilities there, man. I really do. And maybe I'm just looking in the mirror. Maybe I'm just coming at it from a partisan aspect, but I do think there's a register to his message and his manner that will be alienating to lots of people who might actually be attracted to the priority emphasis and even the policy emphasis, just because he comes off as such a fucker. And I do think there's some room there, but let's set that aside. Broad strokes, people moving through their lives in the middle of the summer on a daily basis. What are they to digest? One guy's talking about jobs and salaries and kitchen table economics, and the other guys aren't. And so, like, I just think it's that simple. And look, I can understand in an isolated universe, somebody's sitting in PMO and they've got a mega calendar laid out on the table and they're moving pieces around the board and they're saying, okay, so you know what? It's summer season. People are thinking about festivals. They're hearing about the inability of arts and groups and local events to fund themselves. So we're going to get in there. We'll get a hyper local, all the MPs in the area, and we'll pound on that. That makes sense. And it does only. Yes, it makes sense. Yes, it's a decent announceable for the summertime, provided you live in a pocket universe where you're not behind by 20 points and where people aren't looking for the message, and that the message is about the economy. And so one of the things I wonder, and I don't want to overread it, because I think the logic probably is as I've outlined it. Well, people need summer festivals. Let's go. Let's try to hit that. But you do wonder whether partly there's a strategy on the part of the Liberals from a messaging perspective to avoid the economy. Like, are they now getting to a place where they say, you know what, it's not in our interest to actually talk about the economy because that's now Poilievre's issue. So let's navigate around that. Wait till waters calm, wait till the numbers strengthen, then we can return to that issue. But every day we spend talking about the economy now is actually to help him. We can't afford to fight on his ground. To which my response is, if Poilievre owns the economy, you are well and truly fucked.
Kory, maybe there's a counter thesis here. When I look at the Liberal messaging there, it seems to me that it's possible that in the absence of any central messaging directives, any notion of what the government's supposed to be saying, that these MPs are going where they often go, which is, what have I delivered? What bacon have I brought back to the riding? And let's run on that. You can't run on that.
It's not big enough. It's not enough. Scott's basic thesis there of if you abandon the economy, you're truly fucked. I think that's true. It's especially in an issue environment where it's all economy. Like, that's really what's leading the polling, and has been for months and months now. Cost of living, affordability, economy, said a bunch of different ways. It's interesting that Poilievre's comments, and we'll, I think, probably get into this more when we start talking about the NDP, we're way more focused on workers as opposed to the economy in abstract. And I think that's smart in a bunch of ways. Like, and it's sort of a rebranding, repositioning of the Conservatives, which, as we've talked about before, have always been a little bit more the monopoly man with a top hat and a monocle than it has been about the people actually doing the work. So I think it's a focus on the economy, but a recasting it in a way that pulls the Conservative brand closer to workers and less towards bankers and business owners. So I don't know. You can't be a centrist party. You can't be the Liberal Party of Canada and abandon the economy and get elected, would be my thesis.
Just for a second, Kory. There is not a shred of evidence that what Scott said about Poilievre is true. I mean, his positives continue to rise, highest they've ever been. They're continuing to move up in vote intention, or at least hold their spread, but make gains elsewhere. I mean, the notion that familiarity will breed contempt with Poilievre, there is no evidence of that at the moment.
Yeah, it's not living up. I think there are different theories one can have about that, because I don't think that Scott's entirely wrong. But I think I would draw the example of what we've seen happen south of the border with the Biden-Trump comparison. If Trudeau is still the leader and is as hated as he is,
but if there was a different contrast, that's where you're going. If there was a different contrast,
if there's a different. But right now, like, having somebody be a bit of an asshole, as long as that assholeness is directed to the media, which people have no great love for and never have, but less and less with every passing day, and Justin Trudeau, who is the most hated figure in Canadian politics by a country mile, then that assholishness is a virtue, not a vice. And I think in a universe where you have a different leader who isn't so hated, and perhaps a leader of a different gender, etc., that might not play so well. But that's a theory. But I agree with you in terms of the actual evidence that we have out there. Familiarity is breeding higher polling numbers for him, not the opposite. So, we'll see.
I want to talk for a minute about an unsexy, plain brown, unprepossessing thing that nonetheless possesses iconic status in the Canadian institutional memory. I'm talking about the railroad boxcar. We've all seen them at some point, usually so many bolted together behind a locomotive that you can't see the end of the train. Every kid on the prairies, and quite a few elsewhere in Canada, has squirmed in the back seat of the family sedan at a rail crossing, watching a solid wall of those rectangular brown cuboids, yes, that's the geometric term, clicking by for what seemed like forever. Boxcars have looked basically the same for nearly 200 years. That timelessness has made them famous. Bandits chased them in westerns. Hobos jumped onto them in the 30s. Stuntmen leaped out of their sliding doors in movies, and over the decades, they transported just about everything, everywhere. Our sponsor, CN, operated wooden boxcars during the company's early years, 30,000 of them at one point. They were eventually ruled fire hazards and phased out. In the 50s, the railway began using steel boxcars. One particular fleet was nicknamed Buffalo Cars because of the Manitoba buffalo image each one displayed. The arrival of specialized hopper cars in the second half of the last century removed the grain mission from boxcars, but they remain in use for just about everything else. Modern boxcars are bigger and more sophisticated, often refrigerated or cushioned. A few years ago, CN ordered 800 new ones, 60 feet long, high capacity, and yes, still brown. It might seem a little counterintuitive to be spending millions expanding capacity like that in a period of economic uncertainty. But CN believes that constant reinvestment in the railroad, regardless of the economic cycle, is wise. The boxcars were needed for forest products and metals and minerals and auto parts and bagged agricultural products and on and on and on. Because as I've said here a few times, cargo has to move, and boxcars just keep rolling. Jordan, the sing part of it is make the case to end federal funding for bad corporate landlords. So he has been pushing on that end of the populist thing right through COVID. There's no real evidence that that's working. The polling I'm seeing indicates that what working people really want right now, and the lower income you are, the more you want this, is a tax cut. And Wab Kinew promised Manitoba voters a tax cut, right? Mm-hmm. Why do you think Singh doesn't want to get into that game? And I mean, because all Poilievre's really saying about taxes right now is the carbon tax, and that's not going to be the biggest saving for people, right? If you want it to really make a difference, you might go somewhere else.
For sure. And to be clear, I don't know that he won't go there, right? Like, I think it would be premature to assume that a tax cut of some sort wouldn't figure into an eventual NDP platform. It certainly has in the
past. It'd be nice
to
do it early and own it, though, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you could make a case for that, although you can also make a case that it's tough, I think, for the NDP to be heard in general, let alone on something like that right now. I have to say, I don't hate the angle on rent. I don't hate going after the corporate stuff. And I actually I'd push back a little bit. I think that particularly the grocery CEO stuff was pretty effective. That's you can make the argument that over the last year and a half, I'd say that's actually the one thing that really punched through for Singh was him personally taking that on, going after that angle, going after Galen Weston, and particularly contrasted with a much softer liberal government approach on the topic. So I think they've had moments where that's worked better for them. But I was more interested when I looked at the sort of contrasting particularly what the Liberals and the NDP were doing in Hamilton. I was interested in the tone and the attacks that Singh took to Poilievre while he was in Hamilton, because what I saw him doing there was going out on a very specific attack line around cuts, around Poilievre being a threat to people's pensions, to people's EI, and really actually doing what we've talked about over the last year of the podcast, which is talk about what they're going to cut, talk about what's at stake, let them try to deny it, and drive that message in a pretty disciplined way. And I think that's good. I think he needs to do a lot more of it. But to me, that's an interesting contrast with the attacks that we've seen coming out of Liberals, which have been a lot more scattershot, maybe a lot more pulled off into more identity politics stuff, a lot more, a bit all over the place, as we've mentioned. And, certainly in the research that I've seen, those arguments, the ones that Singh was making, are the most effective. And sort of when you particularly bring those out to voters who are either Liberal or NDP considerers of Conservatives, and men in particular. And when you make that argument around the Conservatives and Poilievre in particular being a threat to things like EI and pensions, like it does bring them back into the fold. And that's true across age groups, that's true across regions. So what I was more interested to see from like a craft perspective was that they are tightening the attack line there. Now, is that deeply meaningful if you're not putting money behind it? That's a separate question. But I thought that
or even constructing the remarks so that that's the thing that emerges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I'm a former policy person, so I totally understand the desire to make the policy the lead, but like it just isn't. Like in this case, I think the attack is the one that you want to have float to the top.
Hey, David.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just want to take a run back at what I said earlier, and I just want to articulate my perspective. And I think you are correct. It is indisputable that Poilievre's positives are rising and that his support looks solid. If anything, it's growing or at least deepening. So that's not my point. I guess my point, though, is I think the voters are only hearing his priorities, and his priorities are pretty bang on to where they're at. I think that conservative adjacents, they hear that plus his posture. And the broader sweep of voters aren't hearing his posture. And I think, again, it sort of is just an extension of the same point we've all been making for a year and a half, which is that I think that there's plenty that he says when you actually spend 20 minutes watching him and go, wow, the acidity of that, the overclaim of some of this stuff. I think there's something there. If you can connect that to voters and go, this is how, as prime minister, this guy might talk about you and your family or treat you and your family, but you can't do that unless A, you make that argument, and B, you place it in front of people, which is going to take paid media and millions of dollars. And so I just don't think that we've seen them make that effort. And, it's 4 people on the internet saying he's weird, the prime minister saying touch grass, and them saying, see, we are giving him the gears. All right.
I think Scott is onto something here. And the idea that there's a ceiling to kind of anger or rage as a motivator, and that could turn against the Conservatives among a broader public who might be tiring of that sort of negativity. I think that there is potential there, but that case has to be made, and that negativity has to be put in front of voters in a way that it hasn't been so far. But those clips are there, right? They're out there.
I think that this notion of rage and anger and stuff is a whole bunch of wishful thinking on the part of the NDP and the Liberals. That's, I don't think, how Poilievre comes across in terms of the issue set and what he's talking about. When he's talking about everything being broken, etc., that is pushing on an open door for a lot of Canada. It's not viewed as negativity. The other side saying, don't worry, be happy. Ignore the fact that you're having trouble, paying for your groceries and worried that you're going to lose your house when you have to renegotiate your mortgage.
Comes off as gaslighting.
That's wishful thinking and gaslighting. Exactly. And so, it is, it's not interpreted the way the wishful thinkers want it to be. It's interpreted as having your eyes open to what's going on in front of you, and tackling the problems that people want to have tackled. But nobody is laying awake at night wondering whether the fucking local festival is going to get funded more next year. That is just the wrong issue set, the wrong tone, the wrong everything.
Well, Go ahead, finish. I'm sorry.
Well, but and there are not enough people worried about a corrupt corporate landlord to get the votes that you need if you want to survive. That is a whole bunch of small ball shit that is ignoring the big problems. The big problems are the homeless encampment that's taken over the park where the festival used to be. It's the fact that people are worried about interest rates where they are and are feeling massive amounts of economic anxiety around their own household budget. Those are the things that will get you votes. And all of this other shit is interesting, but irrelevant in terms of the grander scheme of things for the electorate. So until you get on the topics that are important, I think it's going to be an uphill slog.
Yeah. I don't want to say that Paulos is running a fear-based campaign, because I know that he is offering the people that he's talking to hope that he will fix the problems that are there, and the people that are cheering him on are hopeful that he will fix those problems. But nonetheless, I think it's clear that his campaign is fueled by fear of the economy, fear of the future, fear of a whole bunch of things. But the mood is so sour. I'm skeptical that a campaign of hope can counter that in this environment. I'm even skeptical of it in the States, where we're seeing a real world laboratory experiment of this. And right now it's vaulted Harris into the lead, but the attitudes about the economy are so bad, fears about the border are so strong. I'm not sure that's going to hold against those fundamentals.
I think Poilievre's support, even though his positives are rising, it remains fairly soft. And the support, the people who are coming to him, they're not necessarily coming to him because of his policies. They're coming predominantly because he's not Justin Trudeau. And so I do think there is some opportunity still in there to peel off some of those folks, and particularly women. And the tone stuff does matter there. And look, I think that Poilievre and the campaign there agree. Otherwise, they wouldn't have spent millions trying to rebrand him with a softer image for those voters. Yeah. So there is something there. And look, like, would a simplistic, don't worry, be happy, positive campaign and or the notion that the Liberals have from time to time held that you shouldn't go negative, is that the flip side of that coin? No, absolutely not. In fact, you have to do the opposite. You have to go out, you have to define him, which has not been happening. But I think there is something there.
I think it's kicked down. And I think it's a decidedly negative campaign that you go at him on. And I don't think it's about anger or that kind of stuff. I think it's, you take the examples of him kicking down, using his position and power to kick down with people who have less power. And you put that, because no one cares if he's kicking, even in a way that's untrue and unfair and acidic sounding, at another politician, particularly if that politician is Justin Trudeau. No one gives a shit about that. But I think there's something to be had. I at least I'd like to sit around with some money and a few focus groups and pressure test something around that thesis. But like, again, if it's just something that somebody says randomly at a microphone sometime in the middle of August, you might as well just, be skipping stones on a fucking pond, because it's got zero impact.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to our third final topic. Jordan, you're on the spot here. As I said, you've had some days of quiet contemplation. And this isn't, I don't want this conversation to be how fucking shitty the NDP are. I want it to be forward-looking. I want it to be about, they've been hovering around 17 to 20 points in the polls, varying. Some days tantalizingly close to the Liberals, but always 25 points behind the fucking Conservatives, right? There are at least two major decisions in front of the NDP that will be very consequential. Kory would say three. When he gets his chance. But there's at least two that I would identify. One is when to end the arrangement with the Liberals. And the second is when to start voting non-confidence and possibly precipitating an election. What do you think the NDP should be considering when they make those decisions?
Yeah. So I think that the obvious and most important consideration for them is going to be their own election readiness. That has to be a primary concern for them. They have spent the last year and a half digging out. They're out of debt from the last campaign. They've had some of their best fundraising quarters recently. So while things are not where they need to be, they're on a better trajectory there. So they are. You can see that there's some evidence that they're sorting some of those things out, but they have to be on a good path there. And the other thing I think that they need to consider, and this is particularly with respect to the confidence and supply agreement, is what is their capacity to push back on the Conservative attacks on it? Because this is really what's harming Singh's personal numbers. So the Conservatives, and this is like a credit to them in terms of tradecraft, they have been very effective at tying Singh to Trudeau through their attacks, not just the latest ad, but more broadly in their rhetoric. They've been very disciplined about that. and to kind of tagging him with that sellout language, which is something that is really dangerous for him and for his own numbers. And we're really seeing that erosion. So I think they have to really evaluate their capacity to push back on that, and ideally find some money to get on the airwaves to do so. But they also need to think about, for voters, how can they, and how much time do they need, and how can they create space away from Trudeau, away from what the agreement has tied them to, in order to define their own offer. The reality is, in the next election, there's going to be a progressive primary, as there always is in Canada, but there is going to be a motivated anti-conservative vote. Those voters need to go somewhere. And if they're not going to Trudeau, there's a strong possibility they're going to look at Singh and the NDP. And so what do they need to have lined up in order to capture that vote, in order for people to feel comfortable that they're getting something different? And so I think those are the things that they need to be weighing. They need to also think about how much more juice is possible to squeeze out of the agreement, given what's happening within the Liberal caucus, where the mood is in terms of spending right now. It is not as favorable as it was 18 months ago. The Liberals have been clear. The finance minister, as she is right now, has been clear that they're steering in a different direction there. So does that leave space for a get large enough to justify the continuation of the agreement? So that's a question that they really need to be weighing. And then I think in terms of the election call, maybe I will likely be more mercenary on this than many, but I think that they need to pull the plug at the moment of maximum weakness for the Liberals. They have to do it at a time when maybe there is leadership speculation, maybe Trudeau is even more weakened, maybe their offer in the next budget is really soft. Like, they need to go for the jugular on that. And I think that they can do that if they're able to work on their fundamentals on the org side. If they're able to hold to some of those things, it's a risk, but they have risk really on all sides. So there's a reward, I think, for decisiveness here. And I will say also, like, I know it's an unpopular view in this crowd, but Singh's decision to go into the agreement was a bold move. And I think that he can be fairly said to have squeezed quite a lot out of it, but now he needs another bold move in order to make the next step and carve their own path ahead of the election.
Kory, it seems to me like the conservative messaging is incredibly intuitive. They're saying to these working class people, and these rural people, northern people, you don't support Trudeau, right? Nobody you know supports Trudeau. Singh supports Trudeau. Why? He must have some interest that is different from yours. That just seems like it's pretty compelling.
Yeah, it stands up really nicely. Like, I'm sure that tests off the charts good. And look, all of this theorizing and talking about, when to pull the plug and all of that, tell you when you don't pull the plug. When you're at 17% and you're going to have your caucus cut in half. And until that changes, I don't think it's good advice to the NDP to say pull the plug. I think it's good advice to say get out of the unconditional support and have it be more of a guessing game where the lens is more focused on the decisions you're making on every single vote. I think there's something to be said for that. But you don't call elections when you know you're going to get your ass handed to you. And Singh is going to get his ass handed to him. And I'm going to say Singh, not the NDP, because I don't think it's an NDP problem. It is a Singh problem. Singh is an anchor on the ankle of an NDP trying to swim across the lake right now. And it is not going to go anywhere as long as that guy is there. Like, I think the conservative ads on him are right on the money. I think he's too fancy. I think his priorities are completely wrong for the part of their electoral coalition that's leaving them for the Conservatives. He doesn't speak to those people. And the things that he's doing are the opposite of what he should be doing. And don't just listen to me. Like, I'm not, the NDP whisperer here. Look at the NDP in Western Canada that are killing it right now. Even when they haven't won they've been competitive and come close. Like if you look at Rachel Notley, there is a model there. The NDP, even in Saskatchewan, are doing better right now. They just had a big win in Manitoba. EB, he is in government, and yes, the Conservatives are coming up on his heels right now. But if the election were held tomorrow, he'd be reelected. So, there are examples of success of what works for the NDP, and it's not flitting around with your fucking Rolex in your $4,000 suit talking about things that do not connect to the actual voters that are part of your electoral coalition. He is a loser. He is a dead dog loser. He has been a dead dog loser since he got the leadership. And until they get rid of him, they're going to keep losing because he is the wrong messenger on the wrong message, and seems to not only have learned nothing over his time as leader, he's learned nothing from his NDP colleagues in other provinces who've had substantial success over the period of his tenure in leadership.
I think it's really interesting. I'm going to let Scott go, but I think it's really interesting that both Kory's attacks and the Conservative attacks on Singh are so personal, and that they're not bringing in any of the policy pieces because those are popular, right?
Nobody's seeing it. Nobody's seeing it.
Well, and Kory, you spend a whole lot of time on here talking about how just a thimbleful of voters are going to, care about dental care. Nobody gives a shit about pharmacare. But certainly when you hear in focus groups, people do care about dental care. They want that for their kids. They want that for their parents.
Not enough of them.
Well,
wait, Jordan, let me just engage you in this.
Yeah.
Let me just engage you on this because I don't disagree with you. I poll on pharmacare. I poll on dental care. I poll on school food programs, right? And I advocate for those things, by the way, and they're good things. I agree with them. And dental care is popular. And the concept of pharmacare is popular. And school food is popular. But they seem, I think, a bit beside the point right now. They're not, as Kory might say, big enough to overcome the massive narrative about the economy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they're also a little bit about telling the story about what are the stakes of a Conservative victory in Canada for voters, right? When the NDP and when the Liberals are talking about Poilievre, this is part of the story they have to be telling. It is what is at stake for voters if this guy is elected. And it is to put on the table that these things will be gone, that your pension is at risk, that EI is at risk, that really, despite all of the, courting of unions, that this guy is the author of some of the most, personally, some of the most regressive anti-union legislation that we've seen over the last decade, that he has gleefully voted, to legislate workers back to work and have deals that are less favorable to them. There is a record here. And I think that what is so important about these issues is that it's a tangible way to make clear the stakes for voters about the election of Poilievre. And I actually am not, I think that you can certainly debate some of the strategic decisions of the NDP, and I have many times. I'm not so sold on the idea that Singh is fundamentally, that he's not capable of carrying this off. I think that we're seeing that there are still some potential here for growth for the NDP, and you wouldn't see the Conservatives out attacking the NDP and attacking Singh with paid advertising if that wasn't the case.
All right, and time out.
Well, hold on. I'm not done. You'll get a chance. Yeah. And even if you look at the most recent abacus that came out, I think that there's some interesting stuff in there. On the top three issues that matter to Canadians, so again, we're still in a space where the NDP and the Liberals outside of Quebec are tied. We're still in a place where the NDP has a larger accessible voter pool than the Liberals do. And when you look at that housing, affordability, and healthcare trifecta that people are still leading with, you now see the NDP eclipsing the Liberals on all three of those issues in terms of who is the best at. So it is true that those issues can be more challenging to confront the Conservatives on, but the NDP is also better positioned to do that, and they are positioning themselves well to take on that progressive primary.
Okay, Kory, can you keep this tight? Because I want to swing around to Scott with a different angle on this that Jordan just opened up.
I think there's a much simpler answer to all this. The NDP don't mind losing federally. They don't play to win. They don't pick leaders who play to win for the most part. And they're content with being, first loser as opposed to, driving to actually form government. There's no one credibly thinking that the NDP is going to form government federally. especially in the NDP caucus or their leadership cadre. And that if you want to get to the fundamental difference between, the NDP in Western Canada, is they play to fucking win. They're fearsome opponents, and they'll play more to the center.
They did that.
And they will play to win. And they
did that once federally. They did that once federally under Leighton, and boy, did it annoy me.
Yeah, I do not buy that analysis. It's not borne out by the facts.
Well, it is borne out by the facts and history and the polling numbers today. It might not be borne out by your sentiment, but it is borne out by the facts.
Can I just say before we get to your point, David, your question, which I want to hear, but I think that we should take Kory at face value. I believe that Kory strongly believes the views he articulates. And for example, I know that Kory looks down his nose at a $4,000 suit. Kory wouldn't clean his barbecue with a $4,000 suit.
And
That's
really,
true.
What party better to make that case than the one whose leader has had a gold-plated
I'm not the leader of the
pension since his
Conservative
20s?
Party. I
Kory
knows
better.
in a world where I'm running for public office. Let's just be very clear about that.
Kory knows better than to put his name on a ballot.
What am I doing with this rake? He says. All right,
Scott,
what's up, David? Yeah.
So Jordan, as I was listening carefully to Jordan, she was really not talking about any way in which the NDP would challenge the Conservatives. She was talking about ways in which the NDP might move past the Liberals, right? And that would obviously be a fine outcome for the NDP in the next election. Conservative government, NDP opposition, Liberals in third place or fourth or whatever the fuck it is. And because that's the next step on the movement toward the NDP. So I get all that. So it really makes me go back to the question of what they should do about timing. And the question that's been on my mind for quite a while now is, are the NDP going to let the Liberals pull the leadership switcheroo and ride the crest of new momentum into an election campaign? Or are they going to cut this thing off before that can happen?
All right. Well, that's where I start at. I think Kory's right. I think that Singh's appeal is limited. And I think Singh's ability to harvest seats is pretty limited. And so I think that has to, if you want to be honest about it, direct your choices. The NDP have one, federally, they have one bit of freedom that is unavailable to the other parties. And they celebrate when they talk about competing to win. But they have the freedom to say we're not going to win. And then that enables different kinds of strategic choices. So here's where that takes me. When they talk about implementing the agenda and fighting for dental care and all those kinds of things, yes, that's appealing to progressive voters. But it's also talking about effectively a governing agenda, which takes you deeper into that agreement. And I think they have to think about, well, how do we play in the future? What's our strategy going forward? Singh's only going to take you so far. What can you get out of Singh? Maximum benefit you can get out of Singh in this next election. And I don't think the Singh is going to be able, and I don't think there's a strategy that's honest, that is very much available to the NDP to hang on to those voters, those NDP voters that look to be tempted to go to the Conservatives. I don't think they're going to keep them. I think their hope is that the Liberals, especially under Trudeau, are within 4-5 points, and they can steal from the Liberal votes. So which voter group do you care more about? The ones that you're in threat of losing to the Conservatives, or the ones that you think you can take from the Liberals? I think that Singh can only play with the second group of voters. I think he should. And I therefore think they should do a two-step process. I think they should almost immediately, this fall, as soon as Labor Day is here, if I were speaking to them, this scares me from a Liberal perspective, but if I were them, I would say we're ending this agreement. From this point forward, the Liberals are going to have to show us that they've got a sincerely progressive agenda. And if not, that's that, okay? And then I would be positioning the NDP as the party that is... And it almost has a degree of fatalism to it. Just says, let's be honest, right? Who is going to fight now and particularly in the future most effectively against Pierre Poilievre. He has a vision for this country, and it will fuck you on services, and it will fuck you on the things you need, and it will fuck you on the things we've just spent a number of years with this pact fighting for. And so you have to ask yourself, who is going to fight for those things more? And we will be a better opposition to Poilievre if he's prime minister, and we are a better foil to him now. And they try to take those voters that the Liberals are now, the 5% the Liberals are now desperate to hang on to. And I would be guided almost solely by that imperative. How do I get from 17 to 23 or 25, maybe a little bit of positive momentum in a campaign gets me up even a little higher, but I'm taking it from the Liberal camp because I'm not going to hang on. I'm not going to hang on to those voters in Northern Ontario. So I would go completely there, and I'd be like, let's face it, this motherfucker's going to be prime minister, and who's going to stand against him? And if Trudeau looks like he's set to leave, I'd fucking yank the pin. But to do that, you've got to pull yourself out of the agreement and say, it doesn't mean we're going to force an election. It means that the Liberals are on watch. And then I'd play my cards tactically. But I think as long as they keep talking about Dentacare and all these things, yeah, they appeal to a certain vote point. But the psychology is that you're in government. And I think, frankly, they have to start saying, well, how do we get the people that would vote Liberal but might switch to us because they're so scared of Poilievre? And I would just start moving toward that voter coalition as fast and hard as possible. And you're not going to keep those Stelco workers are gone, man. They're not. They are not coming to you, and they are for sure not coming to Singh. They just aren't, in my view.
They might be coming to the NDP though. Like I'll rest my case with one final point. Does anyone out there think that that the NDP wouldn't be more competitive with Rachel Notley as the leader federally?
She wouldn't be the federal leader. If he steps down, it'll be Avi Lewis. You'll get this waffle movement. You'll get this crazy heart.
You guys are talking about things that are not real. Things not going anywhere. Yeah. Sorry to disappoint you, Kory, but
then he has to follow my strategy.
So we can talk about unreal things, or we can talk about who's actually going to be here in the next election.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't hurt my feelings if the NDP continue to flail around on the mat. Like doesn't upset me. But if the question is, how do you get out of that? I don't think there's a path that doesn't involve leadership change.
They cannot. I'll just end because I know poor David's trying to pull us around. But look, I would disagree hard with Scott. They cannot turn away from those NDP conservative fights. The Liberals are not enough of a factor west of Ontario anymore. They have to continue to bring the fight to the Conservatives in the western part of the country, and they have to do it hard. So they need to fight a two-front war. It is very difficult. It's a tough one to do, but they have to find a way to thread that needle because the numbers do not work for them otherwise.
So, Jordan, just before we move off this and wrap up, just one last insight from you. I mean, I am aware from conversations I've had with people over the years that the decision that Leighton made to bring down the Martin government and risk a Harper government was not without controversy internally in the NDP. That there were some people who feared Harper more than they desired an NDP political advance. And what is the dynamic about that inside the party right now in the face of Poilievre? Are people, you alluded to it when you said you're going to be more bloody-minded than most about election calling. Where does that balance lie right now between, holy Christ, we can't put Poilievre in office, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, holy Christ, the Liberals are so vulnerable, this is a real opportunity.
Yeah. I don't think you will find a New Democrat anywhere who would cheer the idea of a federal Conservative government. You just won't. And it is something that for sure weighs heavily in those conversations. But I think the other factor is that, of course, the Liberals' weakness is not the NDP's responsibility. Nor is it something that they can fix or cover for, nor should they. And so I think that when these decisions and these discussions are being held, there is often a focus internally on real gains. And, I think that for all of Kory's heat against Singh, say what you will, but he is going to go down as a historic NDP leader in the sense that he has gained the largest expansion of Medicare since its formation. And so And that's taken seriously, right? People in the NDP, in the caucus, they enjoy achieving those things.
And the anti-scab legislation.
And the anti-scab legislation. Well, hold on, Kory, I'm not done. And that does not mean that they're Pollyanna-ish or that they're not interested in winning, but it means that they weigh those things against the electoral moment, right? Now, I think that we are in a different place this fall than we were this spring. Anti-scab has passed. Dental care is rolling out. Pharmacare legislation is in place. So that scale is now tipping, to my mind, the other way. But there is absolutely not going to be New Democrats who are excited about the idea of a conservative government. But I do think that you are going to see an understanding that you cannot cover for the weakness of the Liberals and you cannot cover for the weakness of Trudeau. And that would be politically suicidal to attempt to do so. And so those internal discussions are going to have all of those things in the mix. There's going to be hard conversations and discussions about internal party organization, fundraising, candidate search, all of those things. And there's a focus there, as there should be. But yeah, so that's the mix as I see it in those conversations.
I'll end on a point of agreement. I agree with what Jordan just said in terms of not being able to cover up for the problems with the Liberals. Like, I think that's the other key part of what's going on. If you are an opposition politician, which, you know, Singh purportedly is, and the government is desperately unpopular, as the Liberal government is right now, you cannot be giving them a free pass all the time. Like, you are on the wrong side of a change electorate. You are not viewed as being change. And so, like, there is only critique of the Conservatives coming from the NDP. I don't think there's a future in that. You've got to run against both. Kind of agree with Scott that there's probably more votes for them right now going after the Liberals. But, you know, to do that, you got to actually attack the Liberals. And I see no signs of that happening. The final thing I'll say is, you know, it's nice to say Singh's legacy is going to be expanding Medicare, but I think it's going to be that he cut his caucus in half twice, because that's what he's on track to do. For the second time, cut their caucus in half.
Scott, do you have anything, or should we move on to the Hey Yous?
I am happy to move on.
All right. Well then, Mr. Pinsent, ring us in.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay, who wants to go?
Well, I can go because I wanted to pipe in on a discussion.
Don't be mad, Jordan.
I'm not mad. I'm not mad.
Well, I can go.
You know what?
I can go, goddammit.
I'm amused.
You people don't care about clean teeth?
I just want
Fuckers.
everyone to notice, you know, that like Scott's here, you know, wanting the NDP to like fucking concede the election a year before, you know, and like, so I just, you know, I'm amused. It's good. But here's my Hey You. So I wanted to get in on the conversation that you guys had last week about weird, because I think it's a rich text, and I think that there's a lot that we can talk about here. And one of the things that didn't come up in the discussion that really struck me is that when you hear Waltz, Governor Waltz, talk about weird and the way he uses it, and he actually had a really great interview with Ezra Klein where he kind of deep dives into this. He does it in a way that is so explicitly free of judgment for voters who are interested in voting for Trump voters, for Republican voters, that like that is the key. Like, it is not tinged with condescension. It is not about the voters. It is about the leadership. And he also does it in a way that he ties weird to issues that matter for voters. So it's not just objectively that Vance is a weird guy who, you know, may or may not like couches too much. He's a guy who's obsessed with strange things, but wants to cut your health care. And so that is the special sauce. It's not just the word. It's not just that, you know, it's not just that it meets the nod test and that but it's the way that they are able to use it and not imply that voters are just stupid for not voting Democrat. And that is actually why I think that there will be a challenge in just directly importing this to Canada for the Liberals, because they too often have that tone, right? That, you know, voters are just like not smart enough to know that they should vote for Trudeau, and that's really what's at issue here. But I do think that there's potential. Like, the reality is Poilievre is weird. Like, it is weird that he wrote essays in high school about dismantling the state. It's weird that he's only ever had politics as a job. It's weird that he's out there still tweeting about Jordan Peterson. Why? I don't know. So that stuff is like, there is the makings of some of those threads there that they could build on. But the special sauce in weird is the ability to do it without alienating those voters and without passing judgment on them while tying it to issues that matter for them.
Yeah, it's not a basket of deplorables.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, it's very much the opposite. Yeah.
Right. Scott.
My hey you is to CBC, people who care about the CBC. I count myself among those. I work for Bell Media. I work for CTV. But I genuinely believe that CTV is better when CBC is healthy and working on full bore. I think the country's better when CBC is there. And I think it actually is filling on at least on the basis of local news and as a foundational source of, I need to know what's happening on this issue someplace. CBC is filling that a large role in that respect. And look, Poilievre isn't going to put it to a referendum. He isn't going to allow it to be a long debate. He's made it crystal clear. He's been promising that he is going to defund the CBC at minimum. English CBC is gone. Now, we just saw them broadcast the Olympics, keep the nation's eyes on them. But this morning, Canadian Press is breaking a story. Catherine Tate, leadership of the CBC, the board, right? They did hand out those bonuses. Right? Millions of dollars went out in bonuses. And you know what? Maybe those people expected, or maybe those people deserve those bonuses. But here's my point.
She doesn't. She doesn't deserve a fucking bonus.
She sure as hell doesn't. And this is my point. She's already finished. It's a disaster. Poilievre is on track to win this election. And that isn't even really, at this point, rationally a debate. And he is going to end the CBC. And that is, in my opinion, a manifestly bad thing. And we will miss it. And we will miss it as a country, and it will weaken our country in a whole variety of ways. Lots of people don't agree with that. I don't give a fuck. I do. And my message to the CBC is get better and get strong. Get in their face now. Catherine Tate, you got nothing to lose. You have burned and blazed your name as president. It's over. So you've got to start to make the case to Canadians why that's a bad idea, or employ some case to Canadians as to the value and the virtue of CBC. The only news we hear is these bonuses, her refusing to acknowledge where their bonuses. This is access to information. They haven't even acknowledged the existence of these. They tried to tap dance politically around it, refused to answer parliamentarians' questions whether, rather than saying, yeah, you're fucking right, and here's what the case is for it. Or say, you know what, my God, we can't possibly do it at the same time that we're laying off hundreds of people, so we're not going to do it. But make the case for a preserved CBC. Right now, you're just bad at your job, hiding and ducking. And all those people that work so hard to bring Canadians to the Olympics, all those people that work so hard to provide local programming, all those people, our friends, David Cochrane, Adrian Arsenault, all those people that are so outstanding in their job, right? They're going to get gunned. They're going to get gunned in 16 months. And the leadership of the CBC has done nothing to make it hard for Pierre Poilievre to do it. Start making it hard for him right now.
Agree wholeheartedly, although I think you let the government off the hook a little bit on that one. But
well, yeah. Them too. Yeah. And they put her in place.
Kory.
Well, I'm out in BC, so I'm going to do a BC hey you to John Rustad and his team. I would be spending a lot of time focusing on getting a couple more floor crossers and end the question of the BC United's role in the provincial election. I think there are a couple of floor crossers away from really being able to, convincingly make the case that there is only one option other than the NDP in the province, and they should be pretty bloody-minded about it and give no quarter.
There you go. Well, that will probably happen. Yeah. My hey you is a little bit lighter. It's a little bit build off of Jordan's, but lighter. My hey you goes out. Well, first of all, I want to say, and I'm proud to say this, that Air Quotes Media has an official presidential correspondent, and it is Keith Bogue, the great former CBC journalist, who is...
Breaking news! Air Quotes Media's special on-the-ground correspondent.
Absolutely, that's right. And he's going to be writing for Quotes, our online website regularly and appearing from time to time on the Hurley Burley to update us on what's going on. So I'm excited about that. But I want to talk about Governor Tim Walz, who, I'm in love with this guy. I love this guy so much, I want to take him up behind the cubicle and get him pregnant. This guy is the perfect messenger for our times. I would love to bring him up to Canada and run him against Poilievre because he nails all these populist impulses from the right side. I mean, Jordan, if Singh wants to watch anybody to understand how to communicate populism from the left, it's this guy.
Hard agree.
He's so good. And it's been such a joy to watch him come out of the woodwork. And so that's my favorite thing about the U.S. election right now. All right, folks, thanks for being here with me. It was great chatting, as always. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, two mightily public-spirited organizations. And thank all of the accursed who watched or listened to our show today. Thanks very much, and we'll be back, of course, next week. And it was so great to have Jordan back. Thanks a lot.